My name is Silvia Escobar. I'm with Escobar Homes team, Escobar Homes and Family. Arturo and I are realtors. And for those of you who are here, I know you guys know that. And for those of you who might be watching this later, we work in real estate and we help people buy and sell their homes and buy and sell investments homes as well. And so Brian today is with us. He is an attorney. Brian Fernandez is an attorney and associate of ours. And today we are covering the very important topic of wills and testaments. And we're going to talk about, or Brian is going to talk about how important they are, what they are, and the different ways to approach them. So Brian, I don't want to take too much of your time, and I want you to go ahead and explain them. Thank you again for being here. And for those of you who don't know, Brian just did one in Spanish. So now he's going to do one in English.
We're warmed up.
Thanks, Brian. And Brian, just so you know, the people that are on here today are actually people who went to church with us, and Alex is our oldest son. So
okay. Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Good to meet you, Brian.
Yes.
All right.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us, and Sylvia, of course, like always, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, so as Sylvia mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about wills and trust today. So today's conversation, we're going to just try to keep it basic, give you guys the general overview of both items and the importance of both items. Trust can be very complicated. I mean, we could spend an hour just on the different types of trust, but like I said, I think today's more of just a general information. And then of course, if you guys have any follow-up questions, I will be available for that. And then, so we'll just kind of jump in. So with wills, right? So essentially, actually a good question is, do any of you guys have a will by chance?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. All right.
No.
So welcome. All right. So with wills, right? So essentially, a will, I think it's one of those items that everyone should have. No matter if you have a lot or a little bit, it's just one of those things that everybody should have a will. And so what does a will do, right? A will essentially states who your property will be transferred, when you're no longer here, right? So you just take a look around you, take a look around your house. A will direct what happens with all those items, right? And I like to think of it as, more importantly, not just of who's getting what, but it's it really is a peace of mind that you're leaving behind for your family, right? It really is a gift that you're leaving them, because of course, we've all gone through losing a loved one, or losing a friend, and we just know it's stressful, it's heartbreaking, it's an emotional, and the last thing you want to worry about is, what are we going to do with all their stuff? Who's going to get what, right? That's something you don't want to leave behind to your family to decide. So essentially, I like to think of a will as, these are the instructions. When I'm not here, this is what I want to happen. And we leave it clearly so that there aren't any miscommunications. The last thing we want to leave behind is a mess, or something that we leave behind and people start fighting over it, right? The emotions are already high. You don't want your family members fighting over items. You don't want your family members fighting over over your last rights. So that's just kind of a little bit of an overview, right? So something that a will does not control is, so let's think about like life insurance policies, right? So your life insurance policy, that you already have a beneficiary for that. Your 401k, your IRAs, right? Things like that, you already have a beneficiary set for that. So this is also just another friendly reminder that if you haven't updated that, or there's any changes that you want to do with who's receiving those items, right? That's just a little friendly reminder that maybe check up on them and see what the status of that is, okay? And then also other things that aren't included in this are things that you hold as jointly, right? So if there's bank accounts that are held jointly, if you have a bank account with somebody else, well, then obviously if something happens to you, that's going to be continuing on to the next person, right? And very importantly as well is something else that we want to touch on is homes, right? And what does the deed to your home say? How is the title being held to your property, right? So we see this very often where if we have clients that maybe one of the, it's a spouse, but their credit isn't as good, so maybe they take out the loan in just one person's name. So then the deed has to match the mortgage, and it's just under one name. And they always talk about, hey, you know, down the road we can change it. Well, 20 years later, we've never changed it, right? So then the titles, the deed's only on one person's name, and if something happens to that person, well, now we have a little bit of an issue. So this is another friendly reminder that if that's a situation, you know, that's something that we could, I would just recommend if you have the deed to your property, you can look at it and it'll say, you know, A and B, you know, as married to each other. It's called tenancy by the entirety, meaning you guys both have equal interest in the property. If something happens to one of you, well, in that situation, it automatically passes to the surviving spouse, right? And it doesn't just have to be spouses. We could be, you know, it could be boyfriend, girlfriend, things like that. It's called joint tenants. Same thing, right? You name two people on the deed of the property. Something happens to one of them, well, the property then goes to automatically to the other person. So if your home is this way, that's not something that would be included in the will, right? Because this joint tenancy supersedes whatever the will says. So it's, again, just another friendly reminder for us to check on the status of those items. And yeah, so that's one important thing that we want to talk about, right? Another important thing that we want to mention in our wills and the importance of a will is guardianship, right? So like I said, if you, let's just say mom and dad, there's an accident, both pass away, well, then what's going to happen with the children, right? So I think automatically we just presume, oh, you know, grandma, grandpa, my brother, my sister, aunt, uncle, they'll watch over them, right? Which odds are, yes, eventually they will. But if we don't leave something in writing, right, what's going to happen? Well, the court's going to take those children. They need to have, you know, they need to watch those children, essentially put them in a safe place until it's determined who should be having the guardianship of those children. So not only do you have this traumatic thing that just happened, but now, you know, these children are placed with strangers, right? Until it's determined who's going to have guardianship over these kids. And I think that alone is just, you know, what else do you need in order for you to have something in writing, right?
Yeah.
I think that's just one of those key things that just kind of really, you know, kind of hits home, because again, it's a bad time, but what better sense of peace in knowing that at least your children are going to be with somebody who you trust, right? Because that's what the court's going to look at. They're still going to have to determine long-term, right, what's going to happen. But in the meantime, right, that guardianship, they're going to see it as, well, in their will, they said they want the children to go with grandma. Well, because the parent knows best, it's, you know, they trust grandma, here are the children until we figure out what's going to happen with them, right? So that's one key thing that we always talk about and we mention. And like I said, that alone, you know, is a peace of mind that you can have with a simple will. So that's one big thing, right? Another thing, something else that of course we don't like to talk about, you know, our death, but you know, it's going to happen one day. And what's going to happen for our last rites, right? Do I want to be buried? Do I want to be cremated? The type of ceremony, right? So these are all instructions that we can include in our will. And this is another big topic where we see issues come up, conflict comes up between the families, right? Because you have, let's just say, sister, 10 years ago, oh, I remember having a conversation. They said they wanted to be buried, right? Well, now you're at the end of your life and you have somebody watching over you and they say, oh, no, you know, we spoke 2 months ago. She said she wanted to be cremated. So now what? Now you're going to have this conflict, you know, what are they going to do? So again, we're able to avoid this by simply stating in our will, this is what I want done, this type of ceremony. Some people want a celebration, some people don't want anything, right? And again, you are able to set this in writing so there's no confusion, there's no conflict. And we would set this up, right? And of course, with all of these items that we're talking about, so a will, we can revise it, right? It's called a codicil. So we're able to change it if something happens. There's new family members, you know, life changes. We're able to adjust accordingly to what that needs to look like in order to for your interest. Okay, so that's another important thing. And something else that we always like to touch base on is that another big thing is we don't have a will. Well, what happens with our item, with our personal property? Well, at the end of the day, it's the court that's going to decide what happens to those items, right? And especially so in Illinois, if your estate is over $100,000, then your estate has to go through probate court, right? So probate court is essentially the court will determine what happens with that personal property or homes or whatever it is that you have left behind. And this process is a very lengthy and expensive process because now you're having court costs, you're having attorney's fees. So just one of the reasons why I actually got into speaking of wills and trust out in these kinds of situations, because a friend of mine, a financial planner, he reached out to me and he was just telling me, he's like, I just went through this. His dad was an investor, so he had a couple properties. And his dad passed away and he didn't have a will, he didn't have a trust. So they were already $15,000 into court costs and legal fees just for the court to tell them, okay, that house, this is how we're going to divide it. This is who gets what, who gets who. And I mean, can you imagine working that hard and then a chunk of your estate is going to fees that could have been avoided with having something like a trust in place. Okay, so I will use this as a little bit of a segue to speaking more about a trust. Okay, so with the trust, so we recommend a trust for our clients who, like I said, the value of their estate is over $100,000, right? So usually people that invest in real estate, or even easier, people who have paid off their home, right? Our odds are, especially right now with the housing market, if you've paid off your home, odds are your home is probably worth over $100,000 already, right? And again, so this depends, as we spoke, how is the title being held? What's the deed say of how you're holding the property, right? So if it's the property's just under your name and you pass away, and let's just say your home is worth $200,000, you don't have a trust, you don't have a sense of direction of what's going to happen with that property. Well, again, now that's when we're going to have the court involved. And then we're talking, again, those $10,000, $15,000 plus of attorney's fees, court costs. And then also we're not, this isn't something that the court's going to figure out in a month or 2 months. We're talking probably a year and a half, where your assets, it can't be sold. Nobody's getting anything. Your family's dealing with having to go to court, things like this. So again, that's just something that we can avoid all with the trust, okay? And I like to think of a trust as essentially it's a legal entity that's not you, but it's managed by you, right? So the trust will manage everything that you put into it. So let's just say for right now, we have a home, and what we're going to do with that home is we're going to deed it into the trust, right? And when we do that, well, the trust, there's something called an executor. So the executor is the person that, let's just think the executor as the manager, okay? So the manager of the trust, the manager is going to say, okay, they're in charge of doing everything that you would normally do as the owner of your home. The way that we build our trust is you have those same rights. You can buy, you can sell, you can refinance, whatever it is that you want to do, we keep it the same. So essentially, there's nothing changes from the day-to-day of you having your home in a trust or you owning your home individually, okay? And then with the trust, we have beneficiaries, right? So the beneficiary is who receives the benefit of that trust. So the executor, the beneficiary, they can be the same person. I can have a trust in my name with that property I deed into it, and I could be the one benefiting from the trust. So again, nothing changes from the day-to-day, except now something happens to me. Well, I get to avoid this whole probate process, right? So I'm going to save that money. And again, in the trust itself, we're able to spell out exactly what we want done with that property, right? So we could say, if I'm no longer here, okay, here is my the next person who's going to be in charge of the estate, right? So this is the following executor. You name them, and okay, executor, this is what I want you to do with my property. I want you to sell it, and the proceeds, we're going to divide it 3 ways. Here's X, Y, and Z, and then we're able to handle it that way, again, without having to have the court involved in any of this. right? And in that way, and it's also private. That's another big thing, right? So whatever you put in your trust, that's a private. Nobody is not going to be public record. The only people that are going to see it is who we show it to, right? And then obviously if there's some kind of dispute down the road, well, then obviously that's a whole nother thing, right? But in the meantime, though, that's all private. Okay, so that's another very important thing. And same thing as with the will, we can revise this. We can revise the trust. We can add properties to it, take away properties from it. We can add people as beneficiaries. We could take away people from beneficiaries, right? And again, so this is just very general. Because there are different kinds of trusts that we can utilize. Like I said, this is just general information. But again, we can customize it. You know, if you have, you know, people that are underage and you don't want to obviously give them a large lump of money right away, you can set it up that, you know, on their 18th birthday, they get this. You know, you can get as creative as you want, you know, up until a part where it just doesn't make sense. But either way, we can just make it, we're able to still have that control over those items. Okay. And again, in the trust, it's nice too, because it functions as soon as we create it and we do things into it, you know, the trust is created, it's functioning, right? In comparison to a will, well, obviously the will only comes to play once we are no longer here, to put it nicely, right? And then so again, it's just something that I always recommend for all of our clients to have, especially, like I said, the will. That's probably the minimum that I would recommend. And depending on your situation, which we would assess individually, like I said, if a trust would be needed, that's something that we can you know, add to it. And then something else that when we create our wills, something else that we offer is for power of attorney, right? So we do our power of attorney for healthcare and power of attorney for property. So let's just say, you know, you're in an accident where you don't pass away, but you're unconscious, you're in a coma, things like that. Well, what happens, right? So with the power of attorney letters that we leave for property, we're able to designate someone and we can give them as much power, as little power as we seem right. And this person, let's just say, maybe assets need to be changed, right? Maybe you need to sell a house. Maybe you need to take money out from a bank. So with these power of attorney letters that we would create, we're giving that power to somebody to be able to do that, right? And then with the power of attorney for healthcare, so that one especially is important because, say, you can't make your own decisions if let's just say you're in a coma, you're unconscious. So here we spell out who would be able to make those choices for us, right? And we're able to customize it in certain ways as well, where we're able to say, you know, I want to be on life support until the doctor, essentially until I can no longer be on life support, right? Or if we say, no, the quality of my life is more important, if it's determined that there's no real resolution for me to be coming back, then I don't want to be on life support anymore. So these are things that, again, they're difficult. We don't necessarily like to talk about, but it's just leaving behind that peace of mind for our family, because we're able to make those decisions so they don't have to, right? And then we're able to decide, this is what I want, this is how I want it done. And we alleviate leaving that stress behind. Okay. So again, so that's very, like I said, very general information, but I do want to get a little bit more input from you. If you guys have any specific questions, and then of course, any further details, I'm available. You guys can give me a call in my office. I would be more than happy to chit chat with you guys.
Does anyone have any questions?
Oh my goodness.
I'll jump in. So I do have a question. So as far as wills and what you leave behind, is there a specific way to go about, or maybe a specific will to go about leaving things like intellectual property or assets like patents and things like that?
Yes, so that would be, I mean, that would be a little bit more complex, but yeah, so that we can include that in our wills, right? We can spell things out how we want that all handled. And same thing with the trust, right? So those would be things that we could definitely spell out on how we want those items handled. Especially because they are a little bit more complex. So again, you would, last thing you would want is to just have somebody else try and figure that out, right? So
Yeah.
somebody that doesn't know what they're doing.
Right.
Okay.
I have a question. In a situation where there is more than two homeowners, for instance, you and your spouse and a third person is on the deed for the home. If I heard you correctly, if, for instance, one of us is deceased, one of us passes away, then it would normally go to the spouse and to the other. They would still be the owners, if you will, of that property. Is that correct?
So it generally, well, it depends, right? So something that we would want to look at is what does the deed say, right? So if all three of you are on the property as joint tenants, okay, so then yes, so if there's three of us, one passes, then the other two automatically have equal ownership, right? And something else that's possible, again, we would have to look at the language in the deed. It's called tenants in common, okay? So in that situation, if there's three of you, if one passes away, then that person's interest actually passes down to their heirs. So then you would have person number three and then the original two. So it all depends on what was chosen on the, or what was written on the deed.
On the deed.
The deed.
Okay.
And that is something that if you do have questions on, what you could do is you can let me know what the address of the property is, and we could actually go in and check what's been recorded with the county, and we can pull up the last copy of the deed, and that way we'll be able to give you a little bit more information on exactly what that looks like.
Okay.
That's good.
Now I have a question which it's kind of off the wall here, but what happens, okay, we're talking about property that's owned here in the United States. Okay, what happens, for instance, if I have property that's in Puerto Rico? And do the same rules apply?
So what I've had is with people who, like my clients, they have properties in Mexico, right? So we are able to mention those properties in our will, but we still want to have a valid will made in where the property is located.
Okay. In that location.
Correct. Valid for it to be in, let's just say, so like my clients in Mexico, like we still want them to have a valid Mexican will, right? But again, we can still mention it here in our will. But again, will that be enforceable in a different country? Or in that situation, not a different country, right? But they still want to make sure that it's valid.
Okay.
Got it.
If no one's got another one, I'll jump in again.
Yeah.
With
Go ahead.
when it comes to putting funds in the trust, does that just sit there, or is there a way where does that accrue interest? I guess is my question.
So you can put it. So let's just say you can put funds because remember, so the trust, it's like its own entity, right? So whatever you put into it, it's going to sit there. But what you could do, you can name the trust as a beneficiary of an account where you put the money into it, right? Then that let's just say the interest, right, will be accrued and then in the name of the trust. And you can choose to disperse, right, that benefit as stated in the language of the trust.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Got it.
Hi, this is Carmen. I have a quick question. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. So I have two properties and we have them at LLC. Do I need to add them to my existing trust?
So that, yes. So again, so we can mention that, but with properties out of state. So let me
No, they're in state.
Oh, they're in state.
Yeah, they're here in Illinois.
Oh, yeah. So I would recommend that you do, right? Do you own those? How do you hold the deed on that? Do you know?
They're under the LLC name.
Okay. Yeah. So in that situation, So that's a little bit more complex, but it's something we could definitely talk about, right? So essentially, you can still keep it in the LLC and then name the LLC essentially for that to pour into the trust. So that would
Okay.
actually give you almost like a second layer of protection.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. That's cool.
So Brian, I think in the previous workshop that we did in Spanish, you talked about the differences on the deed and how you talked about it a little bit right here. But let's say someone doesn't know how their deed is, how it's set up. So what would you suggest?
So yeah, so like I mentioned, if we're not sure what our deed looks like, so something that we see very commonly is, somebody goes to purchase a property, but maybe their credit is a little better than the spouse's, right? Or it's when they buy this house, they're just boyfriend, girlfriend, something like that, right? So essentially the deed comes out in just one of their names. And then they talk about maybe, hey, we can just add you later on, and 20 years later, here we are, we never added that other person, right? So if that's the situation, or maybe we just don't remember, or maybe it is both of us, but we don't know if it's a joint tenancy, which is again where the property rights would just be given to the other surviving spouse. What we can do is you can just shoot me an email, give me the address of the property, and we can look that up for you. And again, so that is recorded with the county, and we have access to the majority of the counties in the state. If not, we have a company that we work with that will help us find that deed, and that way you'll know exactly what that looks like. Because it's, again, just because we're married, the deed isn't automatically, it's called tenancy by the entirety, which again is when it passes to the other. It's a very specific language that has to be included in the deed for that to be how it's held. If it's not included, it automatically reverts to it's called a tenants in common, which is if one of you pass away, then the other person still has half that interest, but the person's interest that passed away, it gets passed on to their heirs. So it could be maybe not what we're looking for, but we can change that. It's very simple. We do a quick claim deed, and essentially we would just change what that looks like, which is a very straightforward process.
Okay, and then again, some people are under the impression that they have to have a certain amount of goods, a certain amount of income or a certain amount of savings in order for them to even have to think about wills and testaments. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, you can own a TV, 2 cats and a dog, and that's all you need. There's no minimum. It's not for the big rollers. It really is. I think it really is just leaving that piece to your family, right? Regardless of, even just look around at your home right now and see what's in there, right? And like I said, how is that all going to be dispersed, right? And we see the issues with, maybe it's jewelry. It doesn't even have to be expensive jewelry, but if it's sentimental to your niece, and maybe your daughter doesn't necessarily care for it as much, right? Well, why not give it to somebody who really appreciates it, right? So it's those little items that we just kind of take for granted around the house, but it's things that ultimately they need to go somewhere, right? It's the like I said, the jewelry, maybe you have those expensive pots and pans, right? So those are things that maybe we don't think about, but it's those items that end up causing an issue. Like we had a problem where it was a fishing rod, and again, it was not an expensive fishing rod, but it has sentimental value to one of the sons, and it was, and there was nothing left in writing. So one of the other ones took it, and then now we have an issue of people fighting over a fishing rod, right? So like I said, it's just little things that maybe we don't think about, but at the end of the day, if there's some kind of sentimental attachment, and we have to remember, like I said, these are going to be difficult times that the families are going through. They're already, stressed out, upset. So it's just leaving directions for them, giving them that piece. This is what I want done. This is where it's going to go, and leave instructions for them.
Question. So let's just say that if I wanted to start doing that, a will, and let's say I want to work with you, So what would be like the first, what would be the starting point like with us? I mean, do you say, okay, Jose Carmen, start a list of the items that you owe, and then you go from there, or how does that process work?
So we would start off with, and so like I said, so this conversation was very general. And of course, because everybody, there's certain different needs. So we would start off with, I have a questionnaire. It's pretty simple. It's about 8-question questionnaire that I would send out, and you guys would fill that out, right? Usually it talks about if you have underage children, if you own your properties, or how many properties, how do you own them? And if, like I said, if you don't have that information, we can look it up with the address. And based on the information that you provide from us there, we get a better sense of, okay, so what is the right path for you to take? Is it just a trust? Is it just a will? Do you need a trust? And like I said, I think at the minimum, though, I do recommend for everybody to at least have a will.
Okay. If we wanted to get in touch with you, we go through via you or Silvia, or how does that?
So I can share my my phone number, and you guys can give a call to my office. But I'm sure Silvia, you will have that, right?
So this recording will go out to everyone, and then you'll get all of his information on the video. But also, I did put his Brian's name and information on the chat if you want to take that down as well. And so I think, I was telling you, Brian, that my mom every time we used to come over, she used to have these conversations with us, and she would say, hey, when I'm not here anymore, this information, and we would just go, like, I'd go blank, like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that. And so, but then the day came when she did pass away, and we came to her house, and my brother and I looked at each other like, where did she say that was? And so then we started looking for it.
Yeah.
And my mom was a very funny person. She just loved to joke around. And so she had this giant envelope in one of her drawers that said, Silvia and Gus, this is the one.
Smart woman.
And so we opened it up, and there she had all of the information that we needed. And she even had her funeral arrangement there, and it was such a gift. It was such we didn't have
takes a lot of pressure out.
We didn't have to give it a second thought. So we were very grateful for that, and that's what this wills and testaments are to our family in a very difficult time, especially when we have younger kids. And I was telling Brian that as we were getting together, we were thinking through this workshop, it dawned on me that we haven't renewed our will since our kids. I think 3 of them were still underage, and now they're all adults. And
they're all adults.
we do that because things have changed, and like you were saying, Brian, we can renew it as your different seasons come and go. So really good information. The information is there on the chat. But again, we will be sending out this video to everyone who registered and to everyone in the newsletter, in our newsletter. So you will get all that information for him and how to contact him.
Great.
Brian, thank you so much for your time and for what you do. We really appreciate it. And you guys know that Arturo and I, we do real estate. We help families buy their home or sell their home or just reach the goals that they have, their real estate goals. And we love to do these workshops because we feel like this helps this is like a holistic help for families. And he helps us with the real estate part, but it's so good to know that you can also help us with wills and testaments. So thanks everyone for joining us. That was
thank you
thing going on here. So so we appreciate you guys. Thank you again. You guys have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
We'll be in touch, right?
Yes.
Of course. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.